The Academy of Stars, Andromeda Station, 2387. The holographic sign above the entrance of the Andromeda Interstellar Academy shimmered in 17 alien languages. Only the 18th, English, was hand-painted on a piece of dented steel bolted just below it, added 3 years ago when humanity finally scraped together enough credits to send their first student. That student was Mira Okafor. She stood at the Academy's entrance bay, 17 years old, a worn backpack over one shoulder and a chipped tablet under her arm. Around her, alien students floated, slithered, rolled, and hummed past without a second glance. She was 5'4", brown-skinned, and possessed of a jaw set so firmly it could have been carved from the iron core of her home planet. A Deathworld. Class 7 hazard rating. The classification had been assigned by the Galactic Survey Corps 2 centuries ago, shortly after humanity's first radio signals reached neighboring star systems. No delegation was sent. No invitation extended. The prevailing scientific consensus across 47 spacefaring civilizations was that nothing intelligent could survive long enough to develop language on a world that had plate tectonics, a variable star, 71% liquid water oceans, and, most damning of all, an oxygen-rich atmosphere that supported open combustion. Deathworlds aren't real, Professor Vexel had famously said at the 2301 Xenobiology Summit. They are theoretical constructs. Nothing with neurons capable of abstract thought could survive such compounding environmental stressors. The mathematics is clear. The mathematics had not accounted for Mira Okafor. She pressed her thumb to the registration kiosk and waited. The machine beeped, then beeped again, then displayed a polite error message in Galactic Common. Species classification not found. She pulled out a printed form, actual paper, another thing aliens found baffling, and handed it to the desk attendant, a Velhari clerk whose 4 eyes blinked in staggered sequence. Human, Mira said helpfully. Sol system. 3rd planet. All 4 eyes blinked at once. A rare occurrence. The Deathworld candidate. The scholarship candidate, Mira corrected pleasantly. Mira Okafor. Xenobiology and Comparative Planetary Sciences, 1st year. She had earned the only scholarship ever offered to a human through a subspace essay competition. The topic had been, describe an ecosystem your civilization finds uniquely threatening. Every other applicant had written about alien predators, toxic atmospheres, or unstable stellar bodies. Mira had written about house spiders. Not the giant ones she'd clarified in a footnote. Just the normal kind. The ones that lived in your bathroom and sometimes ran across your pillow at 3 in the morning. She described, in precise scientific language, how humans had co-evolved alongside thousands of species of arachnids, how their venom varied from mildly irritating to potentially lethal, and how humans simply dealt with it. Set them outside. Trapped them in cups. Some people kept them as pets. The scholarship committee had been horrified and fascinated in equal measure. She was admitted within 48 hours. Now, standing in the Academy's central atrium beneath a ceiling that projected a live map of the galaxy, Mira looked around at her fellow students and felt something she hadn't expected, calm. She had survived 17 years on Earth. She had survived monsoons that flooded her city for 3 weeks straight, a wildfire that came within 2 kilometers of her school, food poisoning from street corn that had put her in hospital for a weekend, and one extremely unpleasant encounter with a Cape Cobra that she had resolved by remaining extremely still and then very, very carefully walking backwards. An alien school full of beings who had never once faced a predator in their evolutionary history was, by comparison, basically a spa. Her assigned dormitory roommate was a Kellen named Suveth, a being that resembled a large, lavender-colored moth with 4 manipulating limbs and compound eyes that caught the light like oil on water. Suveth had already arranged their side of the room in careful geometric patterns and was sitting perfectly still when Mira arrived. "You are the human," Suveth said. "Not a question. A statement of careful verification." "Guilty," Mira said, tossing her bag on the empty bunk. "You're Kellen, right? I read your species breathes a nitrogen-oxygen mix like us, so we shouldn't need environment suits in the room." "That's lucky." "Lucky," Suveth repeated slowly as though tasting the word. "I was told humans are durable. Some days more than others." Mira sat on the bunk and pulled out her tablet to review tomorrow's schedule. First class is Introduction to Xenobiology with Professor Kethare. Do you know them? Kethare is Dervani. They have not lost a student to their course in 6 academic cycles. Mira looked up. Lost? As in academically? As in psychologically. Several students have required emotional stabilization after his lessons on apex predator ecosystems. Suvetha's wings rustled faintly. He uses vivid imagery. Mira nodded thoughtfully. Sounds interesting. Suveth stared at her for a long moment. You said interesting. Yes. Most humans in theoretical projections say, terrifying. Well, Mira said, pulling up Professor Kethare's faculty profile and reading his published papers with genuine interest. I grew up on a planet with megafauna, tectonic instability, and a weather system that kills people every year. Terrifying is my baseline. Everything above that is just a gradient of interesting. Suveth did not respond immediately. She turned to face the wall, which Mira would later learn was a Kellan expression of profound philosophical recalibration. That night, as alien students across the academy slept in their carefully controlled environments, Mira lay awake reading papers on exoplanetary biology, occasionally eating crackers from a bag she'd brought from home because the academy food synthesizer had looked at her dietary profile and simply refused to engage. She didn't mind. She'd brought enough crackers for a month. She fell asleep thinking about the first class, about apex predators, about the 17 billion humans living on a Class 7 death world who had never once been told they couldn't survive. She planned to raise her hand a lot. The first class, Xenobiology Lab, Andromeda Station. Professor Kethare was a Dervani, which meant he was approximately 3 meters tall, composed of interlocking chitinous plates, and possessed of a voice that resonated at frequencies most species found instinctively uncomfortable. He was also, Mira decided within the first 4 minutes of his lecture, extraordinarily passionate about his subject. Apex predators, he began, projecting a holographic display that filled the entire classroom, are the defining characteristic of a truly hostile ecosystem. They represent evolutionary pressure applied at the highest level. They are, in short, the reason most Class 4 and above worlds are considered uninhabitable by civilized species. The display cycled through a series of creatures. The Vorkai of Helix 9, a 6-legged ambush hunter with crystalline teeth. The deep ocean Lurathian of Pel's world, a bioluminescent horror that hunted by mimicking distress signals. The famous Night Stalker of Dervani Prime, which had driven 3 separate sapient species to near extinction before being classified and managed. Several students shifted uncomfortably. One Kellan in the back row began a low hum that Mira recognized as a stress response behavior. The Night Stalker, Professor Kethare continued, hunts primarily through thermal sensing and vibration detection. It can detect the heartbeat of a Dervani from 40 meters through solid stone. In recorded history, no prey species has ever successfully evaded a Night Stalker once targeted. They are considered the apex of known predatory evolution. He paused for dramatic effect. Mira raised her hand. The professor's 4 sensory stalks, roughly analogous to eyes, rotated toward her in sequence. The human candidate, he said. Okafor. Yes, sir. I had a question about the Night Stalker's thermal sensitivity. By all means. Does it have issues distinguishing between live prey and recently deceased organisms? And is its vibration detection affected by irregular cardiac rhythms? The classroom was very quiet. Professor Kethare was also quiet for a moment. Those are very specific questions. I'm asking because on Earth we have an analogous predator. Not as large, but it hunts by thermal and vibrational cues. The fer de lance. It's a snake, a reptile. When early humans encountered them, they discovered that controlled breathing and deliberate muscle relaxation could reduce the snake's ability to track a stationary human. Also, wearing multiple layers of clothing created enough thermal insulation to disrupt the heat signature at close range. She pulled up a diagram on her tablet and cast it to the room's display without asking permission, which was technically a breach of classroom protocol but which Professor Kethare did not immediately correct. This is the heat signature differential between a human in single-layer clothing versus triple-layer at ambient temperature. The snake's pit organs can't resolve the target clearly at distances over 2 meters. So the survival strategy against a thermal-sensing predator isn't to run, it's to become thermally ambiguous. Professor Kethare's sensory stalks all oriented toward her simultaneously. You are describing a behavioral countermeasure. Yes, sir. Humans developed a lot of them. We couldn't outrun most of our predators. We couldn't outclimb them. We couldn't outhear or outsmell them. So we got creative. And you believe this is relevant to the Night Stalker? I think the principle transfers. The Night Stalker has a 40-meter detection range through stone. That's impressive. But it means its nervous system is probably prioritizing range over resolution. High range usually trades off with precision. Is that in the literature? There was a pause so long that the Kellan in the back stopped humming entirely. It is, Professor Cathare said finally, in my unpublished research. Which you have not had access to. I inferred it from the hunting range data in your 2381 paper. The math suggested an inverse relationship. Mira lowered her tablet. Sorry if I overstepped. You did not overstep, the professor said. Then to the class. What the human candidate has just demonstrated is called convergent problem solving. When a species cannot overcome an environmental threat through physical superiority, they are forced to develop cognitive adaptations instead. This is, theoretically, how intelligence evolves. He turned back to Mira. I was unaware that humans had documented this process so thoroughly. We had a lot of practice, she said. Earth has about 8.5 million species. Quite a few of them eat people. The Kellen in the back made a sound that was either fascination or horror. Possibly both. After class, as students filed out, a Tor Valley student, a species resembling a bipedal cephalopod with chromatic skin, drifted alongside Mira. Their skin was cycling through colors in a pattern Mira didn't yet know how to read. You're the human, the Tor Valley said. I am, Mira agreed, pulling on her jacket. The station ran slightly cool for her preference. I read that humans eat other animals. Regularly. As nutrition. We do. And plants. We're omnivores. The Tor Valley's skin flickered rapidly. You eat apex predators? Mira considered this. Some of them, yes. Shark fin used to be a delicacy. That's a large cartilaginous fish, significant predator. Bear, which is a large terrestrial omnivore. Crocodile in some regions. Lion was hunted. That's a large felid, apex predator of the African savanna. She paused. Actually, we may have overhunted a few of them. That's a different ethical problem we're still working on. The Tor Valley stopped walking. Mira turned back. You okay? Your species, the Tor Valley said slowly, hunts and consumes apex predators. As food. Sometimes. We also made some of them pets. Dogs were descended from wolves, large pack hunters. We domesticated them about 15,000 years ago. Cats too, sort of. Cats domesticated themselves, technically, which is very on brand for cats. The Tor Valley's chromatic skin went to a flat, uniform gray. Mira had read that this indicated extreme cognitive overload in their species. I'll let you process that, she said kindly, and continued down the corridor to her next class. Behind her, she heard the Tor Valley say very quietly to no one in particular, they made the predators companions. Mira smiled to herself and kept walking. She had 3 more classes today. Introduction to Stellar Cartography, Advanced Chemical Biology, and a seminar on interspecies communication that she suspected she was already going to find somewhat elementary. Earth, after all, had 7,100 languages. She was going to be fine. The Crisis Protocol, Maintenance Level 7, Andromeda Station. It happened on a Tuesday 43 days into the academic cycle. Andromeda Station was a marvel of galactic cooperative engineering, 17 kilometers long, home to 4,000 beings of 32 species, capable of sustaining life in the deep dark between galaxies. It had redundant systems for its redundant systems. It had been operational for 211 years without a major incident. That record ended at 0347 station time when a cascade failure in the coolant regulation system for the reactor core caused a thermal surge that fried 3 primary control nodes and sent automated safety protocols into a conflicting loop. Mira was awake when the alarm started. She had been awake for an hour already, unable to sleep, working through a practice problem set on quantum ecological modeling. When the klaxons began, she was already sitting up. She had been raised on a planet where alarms meant something real. She did not need time to orient herself. The emergency broadcast crackled through the dormitory comm. All non-essential personnel proceed to designated safe zones. This is not a drill. Reactor thermal event in progress. Engineering teams report to maintenance level 7. Suveth was awake and trembling, her wings pressed flat. What do we do? What's the safe zone for our dormitory block? Mira asked, already pulling on her clothes. Section F12. Aft of the main habitat ring. Go. I'll meet you there. Where are you? But Mira was already reading the emergency schematic that had populated on every display. She traced the cascade path with her finger. Coolant failure. Thermal surge. Conflicting protocol loop. She had studied station engineering as a side interest, because on Earth, understanding your environment's infrastructure wasn't a hobby, it was a survival instinct. She saw the problem inside 90 seconds. The automated systems were fighting each other. Protocol 7A called for venting the affected compartment. Protocol 7B called for sealing it to prevent contamination spread. Both were running simultaneously and both were correct in isolation. The conflict was creating a feedback oscillation that was, very slowly, making the situation worse. Someone needed to manually override one of the protocols. That required physical access to the manual control junction on maintenance level 7. The emergency broadcast updated. Engineering Team Alpha is unable to reach level 7. Corridor D14 is blocked by secondary structural failure. Engineering Team Beta is en route. Estimated arrival, 19 minutes. 19 minutes. Mira checked the schematic. There was another route to level 7. It was not listed as a standard transit corridor because it was not, technically, a corridor. It was the maintenance crawlspace that ran along the outer thermal shell of the reactor housing. A space approximately 60 centimeters wide, not pressurized for full occupancy, and running for about 200 meters through sections of the station that were currently experiencing elevated radiation exposure from the thermal surge. No species aboard the station could safely traverse it. The Velhari were too large. The Kellan's delicate wing structures couldn't fold small enough. The Torvali's sensory organs were acutely vulnerable to radiation. The Dervani's chitinous plates conducted heat dangerously in elevated temperature environments. Mira pulled up the radiation exposure estimates. Elevated, but within ranges that human biology could manage for short-duration exposure. Not comfortable. Not safe in the clinical sense. But survivable with appropriate measures. She grabbed the emergency kit from under her bunk. Earth habit: always know where the emergency kit is, and inventoried it in 10 seconds. Thermal insulation wrap. Portable oxygen supply, 40-minute capacity. Basic radiation mitigation tabs from the medical bay, which she'd obtained 2 weeks ago because she'd noticed the station's medical stock didn't include human-compatible equivalents and had requested a supply as a precaution. She took 4 of the tabs. She wrapped the thermal insulation around her torso. She clipped the oxygen supply to her belt. Then she went to level 7. The crawlspace entrance was a panel behind a chemical storage array on level 3. It required a manual unlock she accomplished with a multi-tool she kept in her jacket because on Earth you kept a multi-tool in your jacket. The space beyond was hot, cramped, and smelled of ozone and metal. Emergency lighting cast everything in red. Mira moved through it the way she had moved through difficult places all her life, carefully, efficiently, without panic. She had crawled through tighter spaces spelunking in the caves below her city. She had worked in conditions this warm on the construction site where she'd spent 2 summers earning money for academy fees. The radiation was the new element, but the mitigation tabs were doing their work. She narrated her progress into her communicator as she went, because leaving information behind was a survival habit. This is Mira Okafor, student ID 0047, traversing maintenance crawlspace route C tertiary toward level 7 manual junction. Radiation exposure is elevated but within tolerances. Moving at approximately 20 meters per minute. No one responded. The comm system in the crawlspace was degraded. She hadn't expected otherwise. She reached level 7 in 9 minutes. The manual junction was a panel of physical switches and manual overrides, designed for exactly this kind of scenario. She reviewed the schematic she'd memorized, identified Protocol 7A and 7B, and made a decision. Protocol 7B, sealing, was the better choice given the thermal surge's current trajectory. Venting would spread contaminated atmosphere before engineering arrived. She would seal the affected compartment and let the automated cooling system address the thermal buildup with only one protocol active. She threw the switches. The feedback oscillation died immediately. The klaxons changed tone, from urgent and cycling to a steady pulse that indicated controlled emergency. Still serious but no longer spiraling. She heard, through the degraded comm, unknown source, Protocol 7A-7B conflict resolved. Thermal cascade stabilizing. Unknown source, please identify. Okafor, she said, beginning the crawl back. Going to need a medical check when I'm out. Radiation exposure, minor. Don't send anyone in after me, I'm already coming out. There was a pause. Okafor. As in, the human candidate. The only one we've got, she said and kept moving. When she emerged from the maintenance panel 19 minutes later, her hair was damp, her hands were shaking slightly from the heat, and her radiation exposure badge had turned orange. Elevated but not critical. Engineering Team Beta was standing in the corridor, having arrived 2 minutes after the protocols resolved. Their team lead, a Velhari named Commander Preth, looked from the crawlspace panel to Mira and back again. That passage is not rated for. I know, Mira said. Do you have water? I'm quite thirsty. Commander Preth stared at her for a long moment. Then they reached into their emergency kit and produced a fluid container adapted for multiple species. Mira drank. Her hands steadied. How did you get through the thermal section? Preth asked. The temperature in there was hot, Mira agreed. But I've worked on a construction site in Lagos in August. 44 degrees, high humidity. This was actually drier. She handed back the container. Thank you. Commander Preth did not move for a moment. You should be dead, Preth said. Not accusatory. Genuinely confused. Mira considered explaining. About Earth. About monsoons and cobras and wildfires. About a species that had climbed out of a death world through sheer stubbornness and an inability to accept the word impossible. Instead, she said, I'm human. We're hard to kill. She reported to the medical bay. Her radiation exposure resolved within 6 hours. She was back in class by noon. The engineering report, filed 3 days later, listed the incident under resolution method as unconventional crew intervention, non-standard route, recommend protocol update for future emergency planning. In the comments section, Commander Preth had written, simply, the human candidate has suggested expanding crawlspace access protocols. Recommend implementation. Mira didn't find out about the report for another 2 weeks. By then she'd moved on to her second problem set. There was always another problem set. The Symposium, Grand Hall, Andromeda Station, Year 2. The Interstellar Student Symposium occurred every 2 academic cycles and was, by tradition, the event at which promising students presented original research to a panel of faculty and visiting scientists from across the Galactic Cooperative. It was considered a significant honor to be invited to present. It was considered extraordinary to be invited in one's second year. Mira had been invited in her second year. She stood backstage in the Grand Hall, a chamber that could hold 1,000 beings, and reviewed her slides for the last time. Suveth was in the audience. So was Taithval, the Tor Valley student who had been following her around for about 8 months now, asking questions about Earth with the focused intensity of someone who had discovered a previously unknown branch of physics. Professor Kethare was on the panel, which Mira had not known until this morning and which she found simultaneously encouraging and nerve-wracking. Her presentation was titled, Compounding Environmental Stressors as Drivers of Cooperative Intelligence, a Case Study in Homo sapiens Cognition. In plain language, why living on a death world made humans smarter. Not more aggressive. Not more violent. Smarter. Cooperative. Adaptive. She had been building the argument for 14 months, drawing on xenobiology, evolutionary psychology, comparative ecology, and 3 interviews with Earth scientists she'd arranged via subspace relay. Her central thesis was one that the Galactic Cooperative had not, in 200 years of knowing humanity existed, seriously considered. Deathworlds didn't filter out intelligence. They created it. The problem was that the Cooperative's models of intelligence development all assumed a stable, low-threat environment where cognitive resources could be devoted to abstract thought rather than immediate survival. Their own civilizations had developed in exactly that way. The Velhari had evolved on a world with no predators larger than a house cat. The Kellan homeworld had no seasons. The Tor Valley had never experienced a natural disaster in their recorded history. They had developed intelligence slowly, in comfort, optimizing for social complexity and philosophical development. Humans had done it differently. Humans had developed intelligence because if you didn't think faster than the thing trying to eat you, you died. Because if you didn't cooperate with the 30 other people in your group, everyone died. Because if you didn't figure out why the dry season was killing the game animals and plan 3 seasons ahead, your children died. Humans thought fast because the alternative was extinction. And now, 17 billion of them lived on their death world and had crawled, furious and unstoppable, out to the stars. She walked onto the stage. The hall was full. Standing room, technically, though many of the species present didn't stand in the way she did. She set her tablet on the podium, pulled up the first slide and began. 18 months ago, I arrived at this academy as the only human student in its history. Several of my fellow students, and I say this with respect and no accusation, expected me to struggle. The assumption was reasonable, given the Galactic Cooperative's classification of Earth as a Class 7 death world and the associated theoretical models that suggest such environments should preclude sapient development. She paused. Those models are wrong. And I'm going to explain why. She walked them through it methodically. The evolutionary pressure argument. The data on human neural density and its correlation with environmental stressor complexity. The cooperative behavior research, Humans, uniquely among known sapient species, had developed the capacity to form functional social bonds with beings outside their species, an evolutionary adaptation for building coalitions in a hostile environment. She showed the graphs. She cited the papers. She referenced the engineering incident on Level 7, not for personal credit but as a real-world data point. A human had traversed conditions that no other sapient species on the station could have survived because 17 years of living on Earth had calibrated her threat response and physical tolerances in ways no classroom training could replicate. She showed the comparative data on human immune response, a system so aggressive and adaptable that it bordered on medically alarming for species with gentler biology. She showed the pain tolerance research, uncomfortable but documented. Humans operated under physical stress loads that would incapacitate most sapient species, because evolution had demanded it. She showed the cognitive flexibility data, the ability to learn new problem-solving frameworks, to abandon failing strategies and adopt new ones, to hold multiple contradictory models simultaneously and evaluate them without commitment. It was, she argued, a survival trait. When your environment changed faster than your instincts could adapt, you needed a brain that could rewrite itself. The Galactic Cooperative classified Earth as a death world, she said near the end. This is accurate. Earth is extraordinarily dangerous. Every year, thousands of humans are killed by weather events, geological instability, biological threats, and yes, other humans, which is a separate problem we are also working on. The classification is correct. She looked out at the hall. 1,000 beings watching her. But the implication drawn from that classification, that sapient life should not have developed there, that humanity is an anomaly, an accident, a curiosity, that implication is wrong. Earth didn't produce humans despite being a death world. Earth produced humans because it was a death world. The pressure didn't eliminate us. It built us. She clicked to her final slide. It was simple, a photograph of Earth from orbit, blue and white and impossibly beautiful. We come from a place that tried to kill us every day for 3 million years. We're still here. We came out here. We enrolled in your schools and sat in your classes and ate your synthesized food, which is, I'll be honest, not always very good. There was a ripple through the audience. A Torvali-specific burst of chromatic response that indicated amusement. A Kellen group hum. I am not arguing that humans are superior. I am arguing that we are differently adapted. Adapted for exactly the kind of unpredictable, high-stakes environments that the rest of the cooperative has been sheltered from. And as the galaxy becomes more complex, as new threats emerge and old models fail, I would suggest that this kind of adaptation might be exactly what is needed. She closed her tablet. Death worlds aren't accidents. They might be factories. The applause, when it came, was expressed in 17 different species-specific ways. Clicks, tones, chromatic flashes, wing beats, percussion, vibration. Mira stood at the podium and let it wash over her. Professor Kethare on the panel was very still. His 4 sensory stalks were all pointed at her. After a moment, he reached forward and pressed the panel speaker button. Miss Okafor, he said. I have been teaching xenobiology for 41 years. I published the foundational paper on sapient exclusion zones, which has informed galactic cooperative policy on death world classification for 3 decades. Pause. I believe I owe you and your species a correction in the literature. Mira looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. I would be glad to co-author it, she said. The return, Earth Orbit, Sol System 2392. The shuttle broke through the cloud layer at 11:43 a.m. Eastern Africa time and began its descent toward the Lagos spaceport, and Mira Okafor, 22 years old, pressed her hand against the viewport and watched her planet come up to meet her. From above, Earth looked exactly as it had in the photograph she had shown the symposium. Blue and white and extraordinary, wrapped in weather, alive with storms. She could see the coastline of the Gulf of Guinea, the dark green spread of the rainforest interior, the orange-brown of the savanna to the north. A cyclone was forming off the coast, visible as a white spiral from altitude tracking west. Routine. The Lagos Weather Authority would issue advisories. People would prepare. 5 years. She had been gone 5 years, and the planet had continued doing exactly what it had always done. Trying to kill people, failing, and producing more people who were slightly better adapted than the ones before. She loved it. The shuttle terminal at Lagos International Spaceport was new, expanded significantly in the past 2 years as Earth's status in the Galactic Cooperative underwent rapid revision. The corridor she walked through on arrival had signage in Galactic Common alongside English, Yoruba, and 6 other languages. There were Velhari diplomatic staff in the transit lounge, distinguishable by their height and their expressions of carefully maintained professional composure around what were, by their homeworld standards, extraordinary atmospheric conditions. Lagos in October ran about 28 degrees Celsius with 70% humidity. One of the Velhari caught her eye and offered a formal four-handed greeting gesture. She returned it, added a human nod, and kept walking. Her mother was waiting outside the customs corridor. Adiz Okafor, 51 years old, a civil engineer who had spent 30 years building infrastructure in conditions that would have been classified as hazardous on 17 other worlds. She was wearing work clothes because she'd come from a site visit. She was also crying, which she would later deny. Mira walked into the hug and held on for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "You look thin," her mother said. "The Academy food synthesizer still doesn't fully understand human nutritional requirements. I told you to take snacks. I took snacks. I ran out in month 2. Her mother pulled back and held her by the shoulders, examining her the way she had always examined things. Thoroughly, professionally, looking for structural compromise. "You look good," she said finally. "Tired but good." "I'm not tired. I'm calibrated." Her mother laughed, and it was the laugh Mira had been hearing her whole life, loud and unhesitant, a sound completely unbothered by anything the world around it was doing. They drove through Lagos in the late morning traffic. Windows open because her mother kept the car at human comfortable temperature and trusted the air to be what it was. Mira watched the city, the towers and the markets and the construction zones and the river traffic, the whole enormous living argument against the idea that Earth was uninhabitable. "They want you to speak at the cooperative summit," her mother said, navigating around a motor cart with the relaxed precision of someone who had been doing Lagos traffic for 30 years. "I know." Professor Kethare forwarded the invitation. "Are you going to do it?" Mira thought about the paper she and Kethare had published 8 months ago, the one that was currently being cited in cooperative policy reviews, the one that had prompted 3 other xenobiologists to open new research threads, the one that had resulted in Earth receiving its first formal request for a cultural exchange program rather than a hazard advisory. "Yes," she said. "I think so." "Good." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "You know what your grandmother said when you got the scholarship?" She said, "Obviously." She said, "Obviously," without looking up from her garden. Her mother smiled. That woman has never been surprised by anything in her life. She survived 3 military coups, 2 floods, 1 earthquake, and raised 4 children in this city. She was not going to be surprised that her granddaughter got into an alien school. Mira looked out the window at the city going by, brilliant and chaotic and entirely stubbornly alive. "I want to go back," she said. "After the summit. I've been offered a research position. Permanent faculty track, eventually." Her mother was quiet for 3 seconds. In that silence, Mira heard everything she'd grown up hearing in it. The city, the weather, the distant sound of the ocean, the perpetual negotiation of a world that demanded you pay attention. "Of course you're going back," her mother said. "You didn't go all that way just to come home." That evening Mira sat in her grandmother's garden while the sun went down over Lagos and the cyclone she'd seen from orbit made landfall 200 kilometers to the west, producing driving rain that reached them as a warm, tropical downpour by nightfall. Her grandmother sat next to her under the roof overhang, shelling beans, entirely unconcerned. "Your alien professor," her grandmother said. "The one who wrote the paper with you. Kethare. He said in the interview that humans are unique. A special case." Her grandmother's hands kept moving, steady and practiced. "I watched the interview. What did you think?" "I think he is correct, but he does not fully understand why." Her grandmother looked out at the rain. "He thinks it is the planet. The predators, the disasters, the pressure. He thinks the planet made you strong. And you don't. The planet made the conditions. What made you strong was choosing to stay." She set down the beans and looked at Mira directly, with the eyes that had seen 3 coups and 2 floods and 1 earthquake and found all of them insufficient reasons to leave. Every generation chose to stay. To build. To make children who would have to choose again. She picked the beans back up. "The planet is not the factory, Mira. The choice is." Mira sat with that. The rain came down, warm and heavy, and somewhere to the west the cyclone was rearranging things as cyclones did, and Lagos went on around her, entirely unimpressed. She was going back to the stars in 3 weeks. She was going to tell the Galactic Cooperative something they had not yet considered. That humanity's greatest adaptation was not biological and not cognitive and not even the remarkable stubbornness that had gotten her through a maintenance crawlspace in elevated radiation. It was the choice. The repeated, generational, bloody-minded choice to look at a world that was trying to kill you and say, "We will live here. We will build here. We will stay." And when they finally climbed out to the stars, they had brought that choice with them. In the grand hall of the Cooperative Summit, 6 weeks later, Mira Okafor stood at a podium in front of 400 delegates from 32 species and said, without preamble, "I want to tell you something about where I come from." She raised her hand. "Earth is a death world. This is true. And we are still here. We are here because every ancestor I have ever had, going back 3 million years, looked at the thing that was trying to kill them and said, 'Not today.'" She paused. "We brought that with us. We will always bring that with us. And wherever we go in this galaxy, whatever we face, whatever new death world the universe puts in our path, we will not flinch. We will raise our hands. And we will figure it out." The applause came in 17 species-specific ways. Mira stood at the podium and thought about her grandmother, shelling beans in the rain. She thought, obviously. And then she got back to work.